Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, Channel's Business Global will be having an exclusive interview with Nikhil Goel in Lagos, the newly appointed CEO of Gokada, Nigeria's leading last-mile delivery and logistics firm. We'll be discussing the company's success during the pandemic, Nigeria's labour market, and the future of electric vehicles in Africa's largest economy. And how will consumer habits change now that the world is coming out of lockdown? That's a question I'll be posing to Toby Horan, a research manager at the London-based data and analytics firm Ampera Analysis. Then later, I'll be reporting on the biggest company news stories of the week. But first, let's start the show with business news from here in the UK, where for the first time in 2 years, foreign ministers from the world's most industrialised nations met face-to-face in the British capital to discuss the global agenda. Key talking points throughout the two-day summit included Russia propaganda and disinformation, Iran, and the denuclearisation of the Korean peninsula.
On North Korea, yes, you're exactly right. We completed the policy review, and we conducted this review very deliberately in two ways. First, with the recognition that this is an incredibly hard problem, and to state the obvious, it is yet to be solved from administration to administration, Democrat and Republican, over the years. And so we wanted to take account that history, to look at what works, what doesn't work, and how we could have an effective policy to advance the goal that we have, which is the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
The door for positive relations and diplomacy is always open to us, and I think that's something shared across many of the NATO countries. But what's got to change is Russia's behaviour as a P5 member of the Security Council, against the basic norms of international law, whether it's the brinkmanship and the saber rattling on the border with Ukraine, whether it's the cyber attacks and the misinformation, or indeed the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, which was not just a human rights abuse, but use of chemical weapons on Russian soil.
On the sidelines of the proceedings, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson met with the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to discuss the need for a global rollout of coronavirus vaccines. Representatives from the European Union were also invited to London, alongside Australian, Indian, South Korean and South African officials. The Indian delegation were forced to self-isolate after 2 of the group tested positive for COVID-19. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, it's a big experiment. Virtual diplomacy has become actual, but has this COVID spike ruined the proceedings?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've been so used to doing things remotely over the last few years, and it seems like this is something they didn't necessarily have to do, and maybe some people were kind of quite surprised and excited and impressed the fact that the UK had managed to do this safely and securely and bring people from all around the world to this summit. Well, it turns out that hasn't quite been the case, because India, who isn't a member of the G7 and therefore didn't necessarily need to come, and we've all heard the headlines and seen the stories and horrible pictures around the world of India, there's been an outbreak with them. Some positives from the Indian side, so they're going to be taking part in Zoom calls. They're going to isolate, but I think there are question marks surrounding why that delegation were necessarily allowed or should have come, given they're blacklisted and the number of cases is so high there. And just last week, India's cases accounted for 50% of all the world's cases. So I think questions coming into Boris Johnson probably over the next few days as to why that was necessary. If we move on to the summit itself, it is the UK is president of the G7 at the moment. It passes every couple of years, changes hands. The actual main meeting will happen in June. This is kind of pre-meetings, but it's the first time the G7 have met in 2 years face to face. And the first thing, I think, probably right at the top of the agenda is COVID and vaccines for low and middle income countries. We're obviously doing very well here. America have ramped it up. Germany are doing very well there. So I think generally the G7 countries have pretty much got it under control, and now attention turns to countries which are obviously poorer and have not had the capacity to be able to get those. So the COVAX scheme, which is rolling out vaccines to those countries, I think there's probably going to be an agreement on that to ramp up that and to put a lot more money into that. Gordon Brown has been pushing this, former Prime Minister, obviously, pointing out that low-income countries currently account for less than 1% of doses administered to date. So there's a real need to get that done. And then there's obviously the security issues that continue. So questions over Russia and China, Alexei Navalny, obviously his treatment, the treatment of protesters in Russia, and generally Russia's behavior according to the West, which seems to be more hostile if you're taking a Western perspective, with things like cybersecurity and maybe some hacking. Ditto with China and Hong Kong and everything that goes around there. Then you've got Myanmar, obviously, the overthrow of Aung San Suu Kyi's democratic government and the treatment of protesters there, ongoing wars in Syria and Libya, and finally Ethiopia. 6 months ago, the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, of course, said they were going to take federal troops into the Tigray region for a military campaign that he said would be swift and targeted. Well, unfortunately, 6 months on, fighting is still going on there, and the death count seems to be around the 2,000 mark. So there's a lot of things that the G7 countries will be discussing, and they will probably come out with certain announcements. But if we're talking, going back to the vaccines, for example, Boris Johnson has said that this is not a pledging moment. This is not a moment for us to come out and pledge and make promises about what we're going to do. It seems to be more of a precursor to what's going to happen in June, which is when leaders of the G7 nations will come for the real summit. This is the actual sort of headline gathering, and that's going to be in Cornwall between the 11th and the 13th of June.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Now to our next topic. The last mile delivery and logistics sector has experienced a huge surge of investor interest during the pandemic as COVID-19 has shifted the way people buy goods. In a bid to modernise, streamline and speed up delivery times, retailers, corporate giants and the hospitality sector are now using high-tech to gain an edge in reaching the consumer at their doorstep. According to recent data, 21 million Africans shopped online last year, with Nigeria, Kenya and South Africa leading the growth. GoCarda is Nigeria's leading last-mile delivery and logistics service, and the newly appointed CEO, Nikhil Goel, joins me now from Lagos. Nikhil Goel, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. How have consumer trends changed in Africa?
Hi, Juliana. Thanks for having me here. So if I look at the pandemic, right, overall the COVID has accelerated the online shopping globally, right? It's no change that like how Amazons and other parts of the world have grown, other companies. But if I look at Africa as an example, I've seen examples of companies north to south and east to west across Africa, which when you look at e-commerce, when you look at any of the sectors, which normally would have taken 5 to 10 years to bring a change in here, the change has actually happened in the last 1 year itself, right? We are a living example of that. It's the same case for so many other companies across Africa, especially segments like food, medicine, groceries. These segments have shown such a fast scale, which has not been shown in that much time, right? So we have even seen the entry of drone deliveries in Africa, something that people were perceiving that, hey, when is it gonna come? So overall, that change in the market has been fast. Market is moving fast across all the e-commerce players. So it's amazing how the pandemic, like, I know as a disaster, like as an actual disaster is different, but in terms of how the changes have been, it has just made that overhaul very fast. Across.
Absolutely. You know, the last mile delivery logistics or the gig economy, it has, helped hundreds of thousands of people get into the labour market. But I'm sure you've seen that there has been some controversy over the past couple of months. I would say most especially with Deliveroo, there was so much hype about its debut on the London Stock Exchange, and it flopped. On the first day of trading. I think, the stock price has since recovered slowly, but there have been some concerns by investors about regulations, about the corporate governance. What are some of the hurdles that GoCarda have had in Nigeria about the labour market and with regulations?
Sure. So if we look at Nigeria in terms of the labour market, right, there have been a couple of challenges for not just for us, but for the overall gig economy, right? Infrastructure, like the ease of movement of people, the skills and expertise that are required, It can be from the menial jobs up to the top IT segments, the delivery segments, the access to finance, right? That's one of the cases in which if you're looking at the gig economy people, they're always looking at how can they make some money, but for making some money, they need to have some money in their pockets, right? All of these have been real challenges, which as GoCarter, we also looked at and we tried to figure out with our business in a box model, how to handle that. So how it works is we looked at how can we provide pilots, like we call our riders as pilots. How can we provide something before we start taking something back? We provide them training. We provide them the required skills. We provide them insurance. We provide them bikes, so for which they don't have to pay anything upfront, but as they earn the money, they keep on paying us back. Right? So those are the challenges that we looked at that are actually existing in the economy and tried to see how can we solve these problems for the people across. Right? These hurdles are still existing for millions of people out here. We have been able to make a small change. We are looking at how can we make this change bigger as we keep on going.
Absolutely. And I know, of course, especially when it comes to Africa, there can be nuanced challenges on the ground. But then, of course, because you're in a massive, growing sector, you have to look at the issues internationally. There's a quote here I got from DHL, and they have recently said that last mile logistics is electric. That's the future. They plan to have 14,000 electric vans in operation across Europe by 2030. I know that's a bit of a dream for GoCarter, but do you see the future as being electric? And how will you start having those discussions in Nigeria?
Sure. So as we always say at GoCarter, the future of GoCarter is always green, right? Green in all the terms, green in terms of how can we change lives, green in terms of how can we bring in better advancements in technology. So as we keep on growing, as we keep on moving, we will look at how can we make that transition going forward. At the same time, we have not yet planned that by when we want to make that change. That change can happen sooner, can happen later. We will just go with the flow, right? But for sure, the future will always look green for GoCarter.
Absolutely. Before I let you go, Nikhil, I've got to congratulate you. Congratulations on your recent appointment as Chief Executive Officer. Pretty tough role, I've got to say, especially because, GoCarter, you have had a lot of controversies in recent times, especially in Lagos. What are your plans? What is your vision over the next 3 years and beyond, especially as consumer habits will change as we start getting out of lockdown?
Right. So for us, it has been how can we keep adding more value back to the people. In the last 1 year, we have been able to impact actually 1,000+ people lives across, which we have been able to provide jobs. Going forward in next 3 years, if you look at how can we make it 1 million, right? How can we create this atmosphere, make an impact for people across more than 1 million lives can be changed only by providing jobs. But at the same time, how can we change the consumer habits for tens of millions of people who actually we can cover via the last mile logistics, via delivering all the different options that we have across Nigeria and other parts of Africa as we keep moving forward. That's for sure the plan. And technology is going to play a huge part in it. For us, people look at us, it's different parts, but technology has been the thing that we have been able to change everything. How can we provide that ease? How can we make this better every single day? How can we be revolutionary out there? So it's always going to be a great watch of how in 3 years we are actually creating this impact via technology, not just anything else.
Absolutely. Well, Nikhil Goel, we wish you all the best. At least you've got a great platform to boost your vision. Nikhil Goel, CEO of GoCarter, thanks for joining us on Channels Business Global.
Thank you, Juliana.
Coming up on Channels Business Global, I'll be discussing the impact on digital services now the world is easing out of lockdown with Toby Horan, a research manager at the London-based data and analytics firm Ampera Analysis. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be speaking with research manager Toby Horan. But before then, here's some company news for you. According to a leading economist, India's economy is facing an unprecedented recession as the country battles with the world's deadliest surge of COVID-19. Earlier in the week, the country reported 370,000 infections after reaching a global record of more than 400,000 positive cases over the weekend. Large parts of the country have already gone into lockdown, including the three largest cities, New Delhi, Mumbai and Bangalore. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has stopped short of the blanket nationwide lockdown it implemented last year through fear of the ruinous consequences of the economy. Energy giant Saudi Aramco posted a 30% jump in first quarter profits in a sign of recovery from last year's oil market crash. Saudi Arabia's state energy group said net income in the 3 months to March the 31st was $21.7 billion, up from $16.7 billion in the same quarter a year ago, when the world was witnessing a peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The results beat analysts' forecasts of $19.4 billion. While its competitors have slashed dividends, the company has pledged to pay the bulk of the $75 billion in annual dividends to the Saudi government, alongside taxes and royalties. Crude oil production averaged 8.6 million barrels a day in the first quarter, down from 9.8 million a year ago. Meal delivery kit firm HelloFresh has seen a big jump in customer numbers as it continues to benefit from the trend of ordering food online. It said it had 7.3 million active users globally in the first 3 months of 2021, up 74.2% from a year earlier. The German firm, which operates across Europe, the US and New Zealand, said it was seeing a similar rise in demand that food delivery services and supermarkets had seen during the coronavirus pandemic. The digital fast fashion retailer Boohoo has seen full-year sales soar 41% to £1.7 billion. Pre-tax profit also improved to £124.7 million from £92.2 million in the same period last year. The group, which sells clothing, shoes, accessories and beauty products targeted at 16 to 40-year-olds, has been a major beneficiary of the rise in online shopping during the COVID-19 pandemic. Negative publicity over failings in Boohoo's supply chain has been a concern for investors over the past few months, but the trading update proves it hasn't rattled consumers. Luxury car maker Aston Martin has posted a first quarter loss of £42.2 million, compared with a £110.1 million loss in the same period last year. The arrival of its first sports utility vehicle, the DBX, which first rolled off the production line in July last year, has helped boost the company as it widens its appeal in a lucrative segment of the market. In a statement today, bosses said total sales to dealers more than doubled to 1,353 vehicles in the first quarter. The car maker of choice for fictional secret agent James Bond has had a tough time since floating on the London Stock Exchange in 2018, as it failed to meet expectations. The group is maintaining its full-year guidance that volumes will stand at roughly 6,000 vehicles. Now to our next topic. As the world slowly emerges out of lockdown, thanks to the success of the global vaccination programme, consumer priorities and purchasing habits are expected to change. In the US, the 5 big tech titans, Apple, Alphabet, Facebook, Microsoft and Amazon, boasted a combined revenue of $322 billion for the first 3 months of this year. They managed to reach this milestone at a time when many other businesses are still struggling to make ends meet. The question on everybody's minds is, how long will these digital titans be able to sustain the reported growth? Let's ask Toby Horan, a research manager at the London-based data and analytics firm Ampere Analysis. Toby Horan, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. There is a saying, old habits die hard, and it appears to be that case even during a pandemic, because the Netflix recent subscription numbers weren't as what people suspected. Do you think this is likely to be the trend over the next year or so for them?
Well, looking forward, we still expect Netflix to grow. So currently it's around 208 million subscribers. We expect them to finish the year on closer to 220 million. But of course, one reason why Q1 may have been slightly weaker for Netflix is something which they've recently introduced or began phasing out, which is free trials. So previously, free trials were available to lots of new customers. So if a consumer was signing up, say, in the run-up to Christmas, then they would have a free trial, so then they wouldn't convert to a paying subscriber until Q1. However, we expect, partly because of that, the Q1 was slightly weaker this year. Additionally, of course, last year Q1 was the most successful it ever had, driven by the increase in lockdowns, subscriptions because of lockdown. But generally speaking, moving forward, we think it will continue to grow, in particular because of the large amount of money it's planning to invest in content over the next year. It's suggested if COVID permitting once again, that if things go to plan, it will invest $17 billion in content this financial year.
We've been talking about Netflix, and especially for our viewers in Nigeria, they will know over the past 6 months or so, there's been a flurry of old titles, new titles, Netflix commissioned original content. And now in the next coming quarters, Netflix are going to be spending a lot of money commissioning lots of Indian content. What is it? What is the interest from the emerging markets?
Well, if we look at India, for example, that's like 1.3, 1.4 billion people. But in terms of Netflix subscriptions, it's one of its smaller markets. So we expect it's less than 3 million. So that is a huge addressable market. And India in particular has seen a recent surge in internet accessibility, driven in particular by disruptive operator Reliance Jio. But currently, we expect there's around more than 700 million users with internet access in India, primarily through mobile. So while fixed broadband penetration is fairly low, it's still a massive potential market to then increase Netflix subscribers. And India was one of the markets where Netflix launched its mobile-only subscription offer. That was like less than half of the price of its kind of standard basic offer. So that's one way to then appeal. So that's a massive untapped base. And Netflix is really trying to push into that. So for example, towards the end of last year, it did Streamfest, which gave its everyone across India a weekend of free access to Netflix content to really drive that up. And then also looking at, say, sub-Saharan Africa, that's a population of more than 1 billion people. So that's a massive market, especially where things such as mobile payments are available. So Netflix also trialed the mobile payment plan and mobile pricing in South Africa, for example. So again, trying to really tap into that market. Because again, in sub-Saharan Africa, we expect it's got fewer than 1 million subscribers. Yeah. So that's less than 0.5% of its overall subscriber base. So that is a large potential market.
Absolutely. We know the digital scramble is ongoing in Africa. Before I let you go, Toby, I want to ask you a question. Besides streaming, what would you say is the outlook for online consumer trends? I've been speaking about this earlier on in the show. Although e-commerce has obviously surged during the pandemic, a lot of the high street towns that had been ghost towns over the past few months are reporting a spike in footfall.
Yes, so one thing in, say, the UK, for example, non-essential retail only reopened on April 12th. So it's little more than 3 weeks. And that was a long time where particularly consumers who are less internet savvy and might want to be doing some of that shopping. So things like clothes shopping, for example, that they may not be able to buy any new clothes for quite a while just because they're not too familiar with the internet. And another aspect, of course, as well, is as the high streets start to reopen, other things that will reopen as well, like cinemas, which are quite a big part of consumer enjoyment. And one trend we've noticed in particular is the growth of spending on online digital video. So as well as the growth in subscription video, there's also that. So we expect that might then dip a bit compared to 2020. As consumers are then able to start going to the cinema again, because we've got big cinema hits coming out this year, like Black Widow or No Time to Die, for example. So that we expect, due to the cinema, there might be a slight downward trend in digital video purchases and rentals, but that there might then be an uptick in physical video.
Absolutely, we'll have to wait and see. You said next year, I'm hoping this year, I'm hoping next month. I'm really hoping to get some popcorn and get in front of a big screen on the 17th of May. But thank you so much, Toby Horan, Research Manager at Ampere Analysis. Thank you for joining me on Channels Business Global. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.